This is Wajahat Qazi, your host for Kashmir Observer's Current Affairs and Analysis show. I shall be talking today about America's elections, an election the whole world will be watching with trepidation, anxiety, and curiosity. The question that will be nagging the minds of every country, everywhere in the world, will be who will win America's elections? Will it be Mr. Donald Trump or Ms. Kamala Harris? Who shall it be? If American mainstream media is to be believed, then the race between Ms. Harris and Mr. Trump is neck to neck. But what the reality on the ground is, we cannot discern from a distance. The election has implications and consequences not only for America, but the whole world. So, coming back to the question of who will win America's elections, to me it seems the question is a moot one. It's an academic one because the terms of debate, policy, assessment, and the framework of policy, whether it be domestic or foreign, has already been set by Trump and his discourse. The phenomenon, right or wrong, called Trump has redefined the terrain of American politics. Once the frame and terrain of domestic politics has been redefined, it naturally has implications and consequences on American foreign policy. I will use the phrase employed by The Economist magazine of London, which has astutely and accurately called America's politics as the Trumpification of America. This means that whether it be domestic policy, cultural policy, or foreign policy, America has been Trumpified. In this respect, then, whether Ms. Harris wins or Mr. Donald Trump wins, the terrain and the boundaries and the scope of politics and policy has already been set. How should the world respond to that? And what are the implications on American democracy? American democracy has always been an imperfect and a flawed democracy. In terms of elections, if these are held to be the barometer of democracy, then America is a very robust one. But in substantive terms and practical ones, American democracy has been defined by elite capture, interest groups, and lobbying. This has had implications on the nature of how the American state responds to its people. There is a massive, and there has been a massive disconnect between the American power elite and its people, which is best reflected perhaps in its foreign policy. America may have a foreign policy, but does it have a grand overarching strategy? If the couple of past decades are taken to be the yardstick of American foreign policy and grand strategy, what we see from a distance is a foreign policy, but not a grand strategy. Grand strategy means the perfect alignment or a quasi-near perfect alignment of means and ends in the longer-term interests of America. What has happened but America appears to have squandered it in the aftermath of Cold War 1.0. After the end of the Cold War, America squandered its unipolar moment, that is, the absolute concentration of power in the country, towards ends that were insalubrious. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan spring naturally to one's mind here. Another corollary to this unipolar moment squandering is a policy emphasis on hyperglobalization and globalism. Both the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and emphasis on hyperglobalism have come home to roost in the form of Mr. Trump's populism. But is Mr. Trump's populism necessarily a bad for America? Good and bad are always subjective and relative, but let's look at facts. Americans responded to Mr. Trump's, call it a siren song, or call in huge numbers, reflected in his massive victory in 2016. Why did Americans respond to that? Why was Mr. Trump wildly popular? Maybe that is the will of American people. The American people, because of wars of choice of America in Iraq and Afghanistan, and because of emphasis on hyperglobalism, wanted to retain control of their country, seize control of their own country in an idiom defined by electoral politics. To understand Donald Trump's appeal, we have to go back to the time when the Cold War ended. The Cold War's end coincided with the unipolar moment, which meant the absolute concentration of power in America. America used this power to go on wars of choice in Afghanistan and Iraq and craft a policy paradigm for the entire world with an emphasis on hyperglobalization and globalism. In conjunction, these meant an America which dissipated its energy in wrong directions. Ultimately, the victims of these policies were the American people who felt that their destiny, control over their lives, was being usurped by a powerful elite who had a different definition of American interest. Gradually and inexorably, Americans started feeling the pinch and pain to an elite that seemed unaccountable to them and unresponsive to them. In this melee entered Mr. Donald Trump, who promised the return of control, the return of sovereignty, and the locus of control, putting American people at the pedestal and at the center. This, in reductive terms, explains Donald Trump's appeal. Contrarily, the Democrats, the opponents of Republicans and Mr. Trump, focused on identity politics and issues that seemed intangible, and irrelevant to the bread and butter concerns of Americans, and of course their national identity. American elections that we are talking about today and which will take place in about a week's time are essentially about the nature of America. Who, as an American, am I? What is my essence as an American are the predominating thoughts of most Americans right now. Mr. Trump, through his populism, spoke to these needs and addressed these concerns. Now, I'm not supporting Mr. Trump, neither am I supporting Ms. Kamala Harris. I'm putting matters into perspective. In the whole melee and in the whole schema, America has become a nation that is at odds with itself, a polarized country where elections are now a battle. Elections are no longer only about policy and politics, but about identity, the nature of America, and the essence of America. To hark back to my previous point, that is, will Mr. Trump or Ms. Harris wins, this, at this point in time, seems moot and irrelevant because American politics have been Trumpified. This has implications for world politics and international relations. How? Again, I will hark back to the unipolar moment after the Cold War. If we take that as a starting point of American foreign policy and even domestic policy, it seems that America has had no grand strategy since then. It may or it has had a foreign policy, but not a grand strategy. Grand strategy means the alignment of means with ends in the long-term interests of the country. But disaggregate American trajectory since the end of the Cold War, it seems that policy has been based on ad hocism, policy has been based on missteps and misadventures. Now, if America, the most powerful nation in the world, quote unquote, does not have a grand strategy, the world has to observe and take notice. The incoherence of America's grand strategy has meant and demonstrated the limits of American influence and even American power by the indicators of hard power which America has not shied from using since the past couple of decades or so. America stands supreme, but in terms of its influence, it has significantly waned, leading to a crisis of legitimacy in and among the comity of nations. What does this entail for the world? This means that if America is incoherent, if American grand strategy is incoherent, the world will look elsewhere. Should the world look elsewhere? No, the world must look within. The constituent states of the world must look within. Here, the global south, of which I am a part of which all of us many of us are part of, has assumed salience and relevance. The great uncertainty, fluidity, and flux that defines international relations and geopolitics offers opportunities for both the global south and America to redefine themselves. For the global south, it means that it can craft a bold, beautiful, and independent posture and orientation that reflects its essence and contributes to the efflorescence of civilization and crafts a new world order where every nation and state has a role, an honorable and a dignified one. But it also has implications and consequences for America itself. America has been its overweening behavior and approach since the end of the Cold War has created a crisis of legitimacy for itself. The limits of American influence are clear for everyone to say. America may still have a fund and reservoir of great hard power, but that is not what ultimately gives a nation influence over the world. America's use of hard power has created a crisis of legitimacy for itself, which is difficult to retrieve and reclaim. So how can America comport itself? The current moment in international relations offers the country an opportunity to strategically retrench itself and be a normal country among other nations, albeit a very important one. A strategic retrenchment will offer America the potential and choice to focus on its persistently nagging domestic problems like crime, culture wars, allow it to percolate the dividends of economic growth to all Americans and craft an idiom of nationalism that speaks to its needs and the temper of its people. America is not an exceptional nation, but it is not an ordinary nation at the same time. The current denouement of events offers it to accord itself a patina of normalcy. Once America becomes normal, an important member of the international community, an important member of the Committee of Nations, it salvages and redeems itself from all the ills that are plaguing it contemporarily. What would it mean in practice? In practice, it would mean imparting a measure of sobriety and proportion to it. A disproportionate America, an America that is overweening, can only lead to balancing by other states, which can create conditions of war or hostility between America and the rest. Now, this election that will be happening in about a week's time will be the ramrod for determining America's role in the world. Can America take this moment and salvage itself, redeem itself for the sake of itself and the world? This remains to be seen. After 5th of November, we shall come to know. In the next segment, soon after November 5, when elections will be held in America, we shall analyze, disaggregate, and diagnose the implications and consequences of the victory of who wins American elections.